Alright, now we are ready for the second part of our notes. This is about rotations. And we have the definition for the first word. A rotation is turning a figure around a fixed point. Alright, and then this fixed point is the center of rotation. So the fixed point will be called the center. Alright? So write those down. If you need to pause it, go ahead. Alright, before we move on to the examples, let's just take a look at this graph right here and kind of showing you what it means to rotate. Okay, sometimes it gets confusing. If you look over here and it gets confusing, just look at this graph. Pretty much what is important are these. So if you have a highlighter, if you want to box these, you can. And what it's saying is, let's say your figure starts, I don't know, in quadrant 4 down here. So this is quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, and quadrant 4. Let's say it starts in quadrant 4, something over here, and we want to rotate it 90 degrees clockwise. So if we think of 90 degrees, one quadrant is 90 degrees. So if it starts in quadrant 3, it's going to move 90 degrees, let's say clockwise. 90 degrees clockwise, you would go from quadrant 3 to quadrant 4. So you would have to change your point from this to this. It'd have to go from b negative a, so the y value would be negative, to negative a, negative b. So both the x and y value would be negative. So let's just say that our point was, I don't know, 3, negative 7. Okay, and we wanted to rotate it 90 degrees clockwise. We would change the point to negative 7, 3. Alright. So that's just a little crash course of how this works, but we will be using this when we flip the page and do the example on the other side. Okay? So if you are confused right now, it's okay. It's alright. Just keep listening, and we'll go through it in more detail. Now let's go to the top of the page, the last page of notes, guys. We're getting there. And let's talk about the different types of rotation. So let's say we are rotating something this way. So it starts here, and then it rotates. That's the same as a clock would move. So that would be rotating clockwise. And then this is the opposite direction. It goes the opposite way of the clock. It's called counterclockwise. Alright. So those are the two ways to rotate. Alright, so if your problem says rotate something 90 degrees, and if you think about a circle, alright, 90 degrees around a circle would be 1/4 of a turn. Alright, because if you look down at the bottom 360, you know, if somebody tells you to do a 360, you would spin all the way around, so it's one full turn. So one full circle. And then half of that would be half of a turn, which would be 180. And then 270 degrees would be 3/4 turn. So you go 3/4 of the way around the circle. And those are the 4 we will be talking about. So this is review. You should know that. Let's describe these rotations. Alright, so this A is straight up, and then it turns to the side. So it goes this way. Alright, so if we are talking about it turning to the side, it would be 90 degrees clockwise. Let's think about if it turned this way, if it went the opposite way, and it would have to go all the way around 3/4 of a turn. So if you were going counterclockwise, it would be 270 degrees counterclockwise. All right, nice. Counterclockwise. All right. Same thing for this one. If we are going clockwise, the P would have to go all the way around 3/4 of a turn, and so it would be 270 degrees if we're going clockwise. But if we are going counterclockwise, it just lays on its side, so it's just 90 degrees if you're going counterclockwise. All right. And then the last one for C. This one's easy because it's 180 degrees. That's all you have to write because it's going to be the same if it's clockwise or if it's counterclockwise. Either one. All right, last example. Here we go. We've got these 3 points and we are trying to rotate them all 3 ways: 90 degrees, 180 degrees, and 270 degrees. Okay. We're not going to rotate it 360 degrees because it would just end up in the exact same spot. So it's kind of pointless. But I'm going to start by writing the 3 points over here, A, B, and C. So if we start with A, remember this is quadrant 2 over here. The x values are going to be negative, so it goes -4, and then A goes up 2, so -4, 2. And then for B, you count to the left 7, so -7, and then it goes up 7. And then for C, it goes -3, and then up 9. And for that one, the way I counted so quick is this is a 10 by 10 graph, so it's just going to be 1 away from 10. All right. All right, first rotation. We want to rotate 90 degrees clockwise. So if we think about that, we're going to start in quadrant 3, and then if we are rotating clockwise, we would go to quadrant 1. Or this is quadrant 2. We're going to start in quadrant 2, go to quadrant 1. So that would be 90 degrees if we rotate them. So let's look back. This is on the page before, but I'll just show it on the screen. This right here. So if we start at -b, +a, the change we want to make is we want to flip the x and y. All right, so instead of now A is in the x-axis, and B is in the y. So we're flipping them, and they both need to be positive. All right, that's the goal of what we're doing. So I'll write that here. So it's going to go -b. A is going to change to AB. All right, so I'll show you what I mean by that. We've got these points. We've got A. Now we've got our A prime. So we have rotated at 90 degrees. We need to go from -4 to, we need to flip it, and they both need to be positive. So it's going to be +2, +4. So the change goes from -4, 2 to +2, +4. We flip the x and y, and they're both positive because they're in quadrant 1. So it has to be positive. So our A prime is going to be 2, and then up 4. All right, that's our A prime. A prime. And then our B prime is, if we look over here, we need to flip them and make them negative. When we flip this, we need to make them positive. When we flip, it's going to be the same number, and they just both need to be positive. All of these answers have to be positive because that's the only way they'll end up in quadrant 1. All right, then flip these, 9 and 3. So it went from -3, 9 to +9, 3. And now I can graph them. So the x value is 7. The y value is 7. Now this is our B prime. And then our C prime is 9 and then up 3. So what we have done is we have rotated this entire figure 90 degrees clockwise. Okay, so it just went from here, and then if you think about it, it rotates like a clock, and it goes that way. Okay, so now we want to rotate it again. We are going to start here in quadrant 3, and we're going to rotate it 180 degrees. So keep calling it quadrant 3. This is quadrant 2. I'll write it so I don't forget it. Here's quadrant 4. So we want to start in quadrant 2 and rotate to quadrant 4. So if we look at the change here, we always want to go back to this graph. We are starting at negative BA, and then we are going to quadrant 4, which would be B negative A. So now we aren't flipping the x and y, we are taking the negative sign from the x value and put it in on the y value. So we're going to call this A double prime, and B double prime, and C double prime. Alright, so we're starting with negative 4, 2, and then because this is quadrant 3, oh my gosh, I did it again. This is quadrant 2, and this is quadrant 4. So we are just switching the negative sign. It's going to be a positive 4, negative 2. Alright, same thing for B. You switch the negative sign, because notice B comes first and then A. B comes first, then A. You don't have to flip the x and y. You just need a negative sign on the y. So positive 7, negative 7, and then positive 3, negative 9. And then we can plot those. So this is going to go 4, negative 2, and that'll be A prime. And then 7, negative 7 is B double prime. And then for our C double prime, it is 3, negative 9. Okay, and that is our second rotation. We just have one left. Okay, I graphed those pretty fast. If you don't have yours finished graphing, stop right now. Stop the video and go ahead and finish graphing. And I'm going to move on to our last rotation. So we're still going to start from quadrant 2. Okay, we're still going to start from this, but now we're rotating 270 degrees. So if we go all the way around 3/4 of a turn, we end up in quadrant 3. And if we look back at that graph, we've got quadrant 3 over here, quadrant 2. So we want to start in quadrant 2, rotate all the way around, end in quadrant 3. So quadrant 2 is negative BA. And if we rotate 270 degrees to get to quadrant 3, we end up with this, negative A, negative B. So if you notice, your x and your y value will be flipped. You will switch those, okay? And then you have to end up with both of them negative. Both numbers need to be negative. All right, so going from quadrant 2, we'll just call this A triple prime, and B triple prime, and C. And then the last one, guys. We're almost there. We are going to take A. It's negative 4, 2. We've got to see what change do we need to make. Okay, we need to flip the x and y value, and we need to make them both negative. So now, instead of negative 4, 2, we're going to end up with negative 2, negative 4. It's very important that both of these end up being negative, because that's the only way to get them in quadrant 3. All right? And then we're going to flip the x and y, which for this it looks the same because they're both 7, so it's negative 7, negative 7. And then for C, you flip the negative 3, 9, it becomes negative 9, negative 3. Just make sure, quick check, all of these numbers need to be negative, or they will not end up if one of these is positive, it's either going to end up in one of the other quadrants that we don't want it to end up in. Alright, so we can go ahead and graph it. -2 for the x value, and then -4 for the y value. And that's our A. 7 is -7, or B, excuse me, B is -7. -7. It's our B triple prime. And then the last one, C, is -9, -3. So that is our C triple prime. So there's a lot more thinking involved in rotations than there was in translations, because all you had to do was count. My suggestion, make sure you are using this as your guide, and you know which one you start in, and then figure out, am I going 90 degrees, 180 degrees, 270 degrees, and then clockwise or counterclockwise, where do I rotate? So where do you start, where do you finish, what does the change need to be? Okay?